You're listening to the Saturday Night Soundcheck.
This is a special memorial show for Larry Russ.
And here is your host,
Larry Russ, former keyboardist and vocalist for the classic rock band Iron Butterfly.
Warning, listening to this show has been known to cause wild body and feet movements in laboratory mice.
Don't you know I'm loving you? And you gotta believe it, baby.
You're listening to the Saturday Night Soundcheck. And here is your host.
Hi, I'm Rocco on 365, and I'd like to welcome you here to Larry's Memorial Show. My good friend and business partner Larry Rust passed away on November 25th, 2016. Larry started his career at a very early age as the organist for his church in West Virginia. Larry is best known for his days with Iron Butterfly from 1999 to 2005. Larry also played with other bands. Today we're going to be featuring stories that Larry had in his other shows. Some you may not have heard before, some you may have. We're going to start the show off with some of the stories about Larry and Iron Butterfly, and we'll have a few songs mixed in for good measure. This show's for you, Larry. I know you're rocking with some of the best right now.
Well, many wonder how I met Iron Butterfly in the first place. Well, it happened back in 1974. I was working doing sound at the Agora Ballroom in Columbus, Ohio. I was sitting backstage waiting for the band to show up, and there was a grand piano backstage, and I was just sitting there playing the piano, and Ron Bushy and Eric Braun of Iron Butterfly walked in, and they walked over to me playing the piano. He said, "What band are you playing in that's playing today?" And I said, "I'm not playing with anybody, I'm just a sound man." And they said, "Man, you should be out in California because it's hard to find keyboard players out there." And they had just spent like 9 months trying to find one, and they had already got one, but they were saying, "You should come out to California." And Ron said, "You can come out and live with me if you want to." And I said, "Well, I need to save up some money first before I move." So I kept in touch with them, and about a year later, I moved out. And I shipped all my equipment out, my Hammond organ and all my belongings, and lived out there and lived with Ron and all the guys, and we all lived in this place called Bushwhack, which was like a recording studio, rehearsal studio that used to be, Butterfly used to rehearse there and all kind of bands, and everybody used to hang out, and it was a great place. Well, within a few days, we had, Ron and them had a tour to go to Canada, so we had to head out, and I ended up going and helped doing sound up in Canada with the band, and went and did a tour, and ended up doing some sound gigs with them for a while, and that is pretty much how I met the band. Well, being out on the road with Ron was always an adventure. Back in the old days when I was doing sound for him, I remember one trip, we was over in North Dakota, and I was in the back of the truck. We had these big pieces of foam that we'd go back there and sleep on, and Ron was driving up front. Well, we'd all went to sleep, and we were supposed to be heading south from North Dakota, taking a southerly route and heading towards home. Well, we woke up about daylight and got out of the truck and was looking around and said, "Where are we?" And Ron said, "Oh, we're over in Wyoming." "What are we doing over in Wyoming?" "Well, I decided I was driving. I thought we should go to Yellowstone. We was all out here, and why not just take a trip over to Yellowstone and see the park on our way home?" So here we was out, in the middle. It was snowing and everything, and so we head on down to Yellowstone, and of course the park is officially closed, even though you could go in, and some things you could go to, and and see some things were closed because of the snow. You could go to Old Faithful and some things, but not all things. And we discovered when we was in the park that our truck was getting low on gas. So we was kind of getting a little nervous because we didn't know how we was going to get enough gas to make it on down to Jackson's Hole. So finally we found these dollar bill gas pumps at Old Faithful. There beside Old Faithful was these pumps that you could put dollar bills in and get gasoline for. Well, we did that, and we made it on down to Jackson's Hole. So that's just one of the many fun adventures that I had just traveling with Ron on the road. Never a dull moment. Well, Ron was quite a character to be with out on the road. He was quite funny. I remember one trip we was getting ready to go to Canada, and Ron had been awake for about, I think, 2 or 3 days, and we come in, we had to leave at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon to drive to Canada. We come in and Ron was solid asleep, leaning up against the wall with his hand up against his face, thinking. But he was sound asleep, and his drums were completely disassembled. All the hardware were took off of them. And we knew well that if we woke up Ron, that it would take hours upon hours for him to put those drums back together, and we'd never get to leave on time. So we ended up taking all his drums and all the hardware and putting them into cases and putting them in the truck and putting them in first and then loading the PA in and loading everything else in so that Ron didn't know. And he actually slept through all this, which is amazing. And we got everything loaded in the truck. And then we went in and said, Ron, you got to wake up, man. We got to leave. And he said, but I got to put my drums together. And we said, well, Ron, they're already up in the truck. And he's saying, what do you mean? He said, I had them all apart. We said, well, you'll have to put them together when we get there, Ron. You know, it always amazed me how much Ron Bushy could eat for such a very small guy. I mean, we'd be at the airport, and he'd eat like 3 Burger King sandwiches and milkshake and fries, and about 20 minutes later we'd be getting on the airplane and he'd be saying, oh, I just can't wait to eat. I'm starving, man. Come on. And the stewardess would come by and he'd say, could I get an extra serving of food when you bring the food around? Another favorite hobby of Ron Bushy's was tricing. He loved to hop in a big old dumpster and see what he could find. I remember one night that he actually had police come up and think that he had jumped in this dumpster because they thought he had stole some lady's purse. But he was just in the dumpster because he was looking for, good stuff. And one night he got locked in a military surplus store. He was in there, he was in the back and was looking at stuff, and he didn't know they was closed, and they turned off all the lights and everything, and it was like an hour later, and he figured out that they'd closed up and left him in there. And living the bushwhack during those days was quite a trip also. There were several of us living there, and Bushwhack was a rehearsal studio and recording studio and also storage for all the equipment and everything when it wasn't on the road. And there was me, Ron Bushy, Taylor Kramer, who was a bass player. There was also several crew guys that lived there. And it was just, always like on Friday night, there was people coming over to hang out and listen to Butterfly rehearse, and a lot of friends coming over, and it was just like a community of musicians and friends, and it was a great place to be back then in the mid-'70s, and I really enjoyed it, and I think everybody did during that time. It was a great place to be.
You're listening to the Saturday Night Soundcheck. And here is your host.
Rock on 365, your host for the Larry Rust Memorial Show. And here's another story from Larry of his adventures with Iron Butterfly.
When I met Iron Butterfly, I learned a lot about the music business from mistakes that they had made in the past in business. The first major mistake that they made was that they had the same company for management, attorney, and accountants. The smart way to do this is to have 3 separate companies with a tri-check system, with each company checking each other so that you minimize the amount you'll get messed over. While Iron Butterfly had made some very good choices to invest in real estate, when the band broke up, the management managed to sell off the real estate, and the band did not get 1 cent of the money from the sale. This was really bad when the IRS showed up 7 years later and told them that they all each owed about $250,000 in taxes for the sale of the real estate. It didn't matter that they didn't know about it or didn't receive the money. Their names were on the original write-off for buying the real estate. Those who still had the money in the bank and had their homes, the IRS put liens on their accounts and their homes, and they lost them. When Doug Engel quit the band in 1971, he asked for an audit of the record company. By his figure, he was owed about $3 million in royalties. The record company had the rest of the band vote since they were a corporation and didn't ask Doug to attend. Since Doug was a primary writer, he was owed a whole lot more than the other guys. The record company offered each band member $60,000, and they voted to accept it. The record company then went to Doug and gave him a check for $60,000. He complained, but they said it was a corporation. The corporation had a majority vote to accept the amount each, so he got screwed over. Well, a few years later in the mid-'70s, Ron and Eric Braun, the original guitar player, reformed a new Iron Butterfly. They had a new manager, was signed to MCA Records. Things were looking good. Single was charting, they were touring and had tour support. After 2 years, the contract was coming up for renewal. Well, the manager was too big for his britches. And unbeknownst to the band, he had told MCA that he wanted a huge amount for Butterfly to re-sign with them. Well, MCA said no, which meant they pulled all tour support from the band, who was on tour at the time, and also the band wanted out of their agreement with the manager after this, but he would not let them out. So they were tied into a contract with this manager for another 5 years, and they could not be able to sign with anyone else, no other record label, and the manager wouldn't do anything for them, and they couldn't sign with another manager. This is what is called being shelved. The band tried to keep going and doing some gigs without tour support, but it was hard to do without tour support. And within the year, they fell apart. Well, a couple of good examples of good business was Kansas, who had Don Kirshner as their manager. He told them at the time he was putting away a trust fund for each member, a part of their money, till they reached the age of 59. If they broke into it before age 59, they lost a big part. They had no idea what percentage was in the trust fund. Well, I was at Kerry Livern's house when he took back over his business affairs. When he was about in his 50s, Don Kirshner had put 80% of all they made into a trust fund. They had been drawing interest since the 70s, and everybody in the band was rich from just the 20% they had been given. To me, this is a good sign of a very good and honest manager. If all that were in the business were like this, wouldn't it be great? Even Chicago's management made good decisions. They invested heavily in real estate. They owned a whole city block in Wilshire and Beverly Hills in the business district, right down there near Rodeo Drive. And they also owned the Twin Towers building in Century City, L.A., and they made a lot more real estate investments as well. So you can know that they're going to be well off for years, and they got to worry about retirement. Well, one of the trips that I took with Iron Butterfly after I moved out to California was up to Canada. We had to drive about a couple of days to get up to the British Columbia. Then we had to go through customs, which was a lot of fun. I remember the customs guard was not too friendly about rare Les Pauls and stuff. He pulled out Eric Braun's old Les Paul out of the case and looked at it, laid it down on the hard concrete and scratched it. Eric was about to lose it, but needless to say, he held his cool, and finally we made it through customs. It was in the middle of winter, right after Christmas, and the snow and horrible weather, but we went on and had to go on over to an area called Trails End. It was a little small town down at the end of the trail, and in that town was a hall that we played in, and we had to carry all the equipment up 2 flights of stairs, including all the PA, all the Hammond organ, Mellotrons, all the heavy stuff, up 2 flights of stairs. Boy, was that fun. Anyway, we got through it, and it was great. And then we was traveling, and we was heading down this one road late at night, and we come upon this bridge. And this bridge said that the weight limit was like way lower than what our truck was. So we didn't know what to do, and we looked on the map, and there were no other roads between where we was and where we had to go to. So we ended up, everybody got out of the truck except Ron, who was the smallest person and weighed the less, and Ron drove the truck. So what we did was we got out, and he just drove it real slow across the bridge. And as he was going across, you could hear the bridge just creaking, and we thought any moment the truck was going to go through, and it was a scary time. But old Ron did it, and he pulled through and got the truck through, and we made it through on that trip, on that part. And then we drove on north to Kamloops and some other cities in northern BC, and it was a great trip. And then we headed back down, and we'd been driving all through the snow and made it all the way back down to California, all the way down to what's called the Grapevine, which is these mountains that go over into right over into Los Angeles. We got all the way down there, and they said you couldn't drive over there unless you had change. Well, we just got done driving all this horrible weather that was a lot worse than that, but we had to turn around and drive north about 3 or 4 hours and cut over to the coast and go around and come back down about 3 or 4 hours. So we got a lot of extra driving in on top of it. So it was a fun trip. Another one of our trips when I was still doing sound with Butterfly was out to Texas. And we was driving from California out to Middle Texas, and we had this new road guy that he was very unique. He, first of all, would only eat at Denny's. He didn't want to eat anywhere else, so that was not an option. Only at Denny's. Only at Denny's. Anyway, he also could hardly ever drive the truck. I mean, he'd maybe drive about an hour or two, and he was worn out. So if you know the distance from California out to the middle of Texas, that's a lot of driving, especially in a truck. That's a lot of hours, especially when you can't drive legally over 55 miles an hour. But I managed to stay awake and do the trip and make it, driving straight through. Well, we get there, and we was playing also with Rush at that date, so that was fun. At least had a good band to hear. And our friend, he was pretty much worthless, to get work done. So I did about, 3/4 of the work, and he maybe did a quarter of the work, and we made it through the date, but he just, it was just funny. You just get these people that just don't get anything done for you, and you end up doing all the work. Well, this is one of those occasions. Rush was a lot of fun, though. It was great to see them. They had all these walls of Marshall amps, and behind the Marshall stacks, he had a little small Fender Champ. And even though he had all the Marshall stacks, he wasn't playing through any of them. He was only playing through the Fender Champ. The Marshall stacks were just there for looks. And it helped keep their stage volume down. But they were a great band and great to get along with, and we had a great gig with them. And of course, the drive home was about as fun as the drive out there, and at least I got a good night's sleep before I had to drive all the way back. I think I had to drive back. I think it was Houston that we was at, and I had to drive back to California. That's just some more of the fun, lovely gigs I did while I was still doing sound.
You're listening to the Saturday Night Sound Check. And here is your host.
Rock on 365, your host for the Larry Rust Memorial Show. And here's another story about Larry when he joined Iron Butterfly.
Well, this is a story about when I was asked to play keyboards for Iron Butterfly in 1999. I had known Ron Bushy since the middle 70s and had remained friends since then. In April of that year, Ron and Lee called me about joining the band. I went to meet with Lee Dorman to discuss everything. At that time, I was working full-time in my own home studio and was not in a hurry to join a new band. Lee said that they had a guy that had been practicing with them but didn't know if he would work out. I told him they should at least give the guy a chance since he had been working, so they decided to take him on tour to Europe with them that summer. When they got back from Europe, Ron Bushy called me from the airport. He asked me if there was any way that I could at least do the rest of the gigs and for the rest of the year because the guy was not working out. So I said yes. I asked Ron how long it was to the next gig. He said 8 days. He said he would drop off the tapes for me to learn the next day, leaving only 7 days, and that I had 7 days to learn all and one rehearsal before playing before 25,000 people. I'm not normally nervous playing live, but I have to tell you, I was nervous that day. We were playing Freedom Fest in Columbus, Ohio. Early in the day were mostly Rasta reggae bands. It was about 100 degrees, 100% humidity that day. Most of the bands had leather pants and jackets on and were baked and soaked from the heat. Well, as the evening came, people in the crowd were ready for some rock and roll. Now, on the bill that night was us, Iron Butterfly, and Jefferson Starship. What a great crowd to play for, and I managed to remember 99% of everything that night. The next week was filled with 3 major gigs, starting on a Friday, an outdoor concert in Peoria, Illinois. Then we flew down to Nashville with no sleep and drove halfway between Nashville towards Chattanooga to a huge 3-day festival that is also being filmed in HD, Itchycoo Park Festival. Featured in 2 DVDs that the festival, Living Legends of Rock and rock and roll greats Iron Butterfly, many classic bands on that festival, including Styx, Starship with Mickey Thomas, Rick Springfield, American, Mark Farner, John Kay and Steppenwolf, Paul Rogers, Firefall, Rare Earth, and Felix Cavalier's Rascals. Nothing like being filmed on DVD on your third gig and being very tired from no sleep before and traveling. We then drove back to Nashville and slept there for the night because we had an early flight to L.A. the next morning. We was flying to L.A. to play the Rhino Records Retro Fest, which we barely made it in time for that also. Was some great classic bands on the bill. The Turtles, Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels, Dick Dale and the Deltones, and the Three Dog Night. I remember standing backstage during a video interview for Iron Butterfly while Three Dog Night was doing one during the interview. That was quite funny. We did some other dates that fall, and I ended up staying with the band for 6 years to 2005, and also did the fill-in set of dates in Italy in 2006. On a future story, I will tell you about some of the tours in Europe. Well, tonight's story is about a concert we did down in Santiago, Chile, when I was playing with Iron Butterfly, and I also have a song of In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida with me playing with Butterfly. In 2002, when I was with Iron Butterfly, we had the honor of playing in Santiago, Chile with Rare Earth. It was in December, which was summer for them. We had a long flight, 14 hours from Los Angeles to Santiago, Chile. When we arrived, we were greeted with a $500 per person entry tax, which we had not been told about. Lee grumbled and complained for about a half an hour, and talking on the phone with the promoter, he finally paid for all of us, and the promoter said he would give Lee back the money later on that day. We were very tired, and we'd left L.A. at 9 p.m. and got to Chile about 11 a.m. When we walked out of the door, you would have thought the Beatles had landed. There were press everywhere taking pictures, and we were a tired mess to take pictures of, I can tell you. I found out the reason was that the Iron Butterfly had never played in South America in years past, so it was a major deal. So we left the airport and was told we had a press conference as soon as we got to our hotel. Oh joy, just what we wanted to do when you wanted to go sleep. So we went to our rooms, dropped off our stuff, and went to the conference room in the hotel for a press conference. There was radio, TV, and newspaper reporters from all over South America. They were asking us questions and taking pictures. Then afterwards, the promoters took us out for a late lunch. After lunch, we came home to the hotel and took a much-deserved nap before a late dinner. The promoter had flown us and Rare Earth down a week early just to hang out and relax till we played, which was great. Each night, the promoter would pick us up with a couple limos and take us out to a fancy restaurant. Really great food, like Chilean sea bass, which was cheap. About $5 for a dinner in a fancy restaurant. And Chilean wine was good also. We were having fun, hanging out with Rare Earth, who were a great bunch of guys who were also down to earth. We were sitting at the tables, and this guy and his beautiful girlfriend come in. Well, the custom in Chile is to kiss you on the cheek. The gentleman, Mr. Pinera, not to be confused with Mike Pinera, laughed and said to me, "You like my wife, huh, Larry?" I politely said, "No, I just want one just like her," which I found out was the correct thing to say. We became instant friends, and he invited me to come hang out with him that night and the other band members of our band and Rare Earth. So later after dinner, he sent a limo to pick us up. See, in Santiago, there are areas that party all night, and Mr. Pinera owned several bars and restaurants in that area. And at the end of the night, when we were tired, he would send us home via limo. In the following days hanging out with him, I found out that he was the son of the guy who led the coup in Chile about 40 years before. And as we walked down the street, grandmothers would walk up to him and ask him to bless their granddaughters. And if we pulled up in front of a restaurant, the owners would move their whomever's car that was parked in front and park his there. I'm pretty sure he was, shall we say, connected. He had a BMW top-of-the-line sports car, and he drove like a madman on the city streets. He'd pull up by a police car and wave hello to them at a light, and then when the light changed, he would peel out and be driving up to 120 miles an hour in and out of traffic. Interesting individual, pretty scary driver, too. It was great walking down the streets of Santiago. They had done so much promo that everybody knew who we were. I'd never been somewhere that everyone would point and say, Iron Butterfly, and the people would even give us gifts. We also did a South American MTV show later in the week, which was a trip, I can tell you. Hanging out with Rare Earth was so much fun. We'd play some of the gigs together before, so we were all friends. We were all on the same floor in the hotel, so we kept doing stuff, moving around fake plants, sometimes putting them in front of Lee's door, because he'd always go to bed early. And of course, Lee was not very amused, but hey, we also went out into the street fairs and got a lot of great deals on some lapis stones and other great things. Then finally came Saturday night, the night of the concert. We did the load-in and sound check in the afternoon. We come back a half an hour before the show time, and when we walked out on stage, I walked to the front of the stage and raised my hands up in the air. The packed house was screaming and cheering, and when you haven't even played a note, you know it's going to be a great concert. And we did. We had a great concert that night, as well as Rare Earth. I even walked out and sat in for Rare Earth on part of a song. I tell you, it was hard to get on the plane the next day to come home. Chile has some beautiful and wonderful and loving people. If you ever get a